Despite the triumph of Apollo 17, have you ever wondered why no one has returned to deep space for over 50 years? Technology is better than ever. Rockets even land themselves. So what's the holdup? The truth is surprising. Despite all our advances, getting humans back to the moon has quietly become harder than we expected. So if returning to the moon is now harder, what made it feel almost straightforward during Apollo? Let's rewind and look at Apollo 11's beautifully simple blueprint. First question, how did they even begin such a massive journey? With the Saturn V, at the time the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, roaring to life and pushing the astronauts towards space in one monumental leap. And once they cleared Earth, what happened next? The spacecraft separated, performed its trans-lunar injection burn, and set off directly toward the moon. No refueling depots, no complex choreography, just one big push. Then comes another question. How did they keep everything stable in the vacuum of space? Simple. They rotated and redocked the command and lunar modules, locking them into a solid, reliable configuration. Approaching the moon, two precise engine burns slid them smoothly into lunar orbit, and from there the lunar module dropped toward the surface, letting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin spend 21 hours 36 minutes exploring another world. But how did they get back? Even that was elegantly minimal. The ascent stage lifted the astronauts off the surface, reunited with the command module, and the discarded lander crashed into the moon. Finally, the crew headed home, splashing safely into the Pacific. One rocket, one path, one journey. A mission structure so clean and direct that today's return plans look almost unbelievable in comparison. As simple as Apollo looked, Artemis flips the script completely, and that raises the question everyone eventually asks. Why does the modern moon mission look like an interplanetary puzzle instead of a straight shot? Well, let's walk through the plan step by step, because once you hear it, you'll understand just how dramatically the game has changed. First, imagine asking, why don't we just launch the lander with full fuel like before? The answer is, we can't. The vehicles are much larger, the mission's much longer, and the fuel needs far greater. So instead of one rocket, Artemis begins with SpaceX launching a massive fuel depot into Earth orbit. But is one launch enough? Not even close. Multiple tanker flights must climb into orbit one after another, pumping propellant into this floating gas station until it's fully loaded. Then comes the next logical question. What about the lander itself? Starship, the human landing system, launches empty enough to reach orbit, then docks with the depot to drink the fuel it needs. Only after that orbital pit stop can Starship perform its trans-lunar injection burn and begin the 6-day cruise toward a special orbit near the moon, the near-rectilinear halo orbit, where it will simply wait for its crew. Yes, wait. The lander arrives before the astronauts even leave Earth. So how do the astronauts get there? They take a completely different vehicle. The Orion spacecraft launches atop the Space Launch System, a rocket so powerful it surprises even veteran engineers. But after liftoff, what do? They run system checks, adjust solar arrays, and then fire their engine for a long, precise trans-lunar injection burn. Over several days, they coast toward the moon, perform small corrections, and finally insert themselves into the same halo orbit Starship is patiently circling. Only then can Orion slowly approach and dock with the waiting lander. And here another question emerges. Why split the crew? Because the system is designed for safety. 2 astronauts descend to the surface in Starship while 2 remain aboard Orion. Orion holds its position in lunar orbit for roughly 6.5 days, timed so that when the surface mission ends, the ascent back to orbit lines up perfectly. Meanwhile, on the moon, the crew performs moonwalks, gathers samples, and conducts experiments in ways Apollo could only dream of. But what happens when it's time to leave? Starship's ascent stage lifts off from the moon and returns to Orion, where the full crew reunites, transfers samples, and prepares for the long trip home. Only after reaching the ideal departure point does Orion fire its engine, slingshotting past the moon and coasting toward Earth. Finally, assisted by 11 parachutes, it splashes gently into the Pacific for recovery. One mission, many vehicles, countless steps, and that's the heart of it. Artemis is not Apollo. It's safer, more ambitious, and vastly more complex because this time we're not just visiting the moon. We're learning how to stay now. After hearing all that complexity, you might ask, why did Apollo get away with something so simple while Artemis looks like a logistical maze? The answer begins with the mission's purpose. Apollo wasn't designed to build a future on the moon. It was designed to win a geopolitical race. The goal was symbolic, fast, and narrow. Land, explore briefly, grab samples, and return home. Everything was optimized for speed and spectacle, not longevity. But Artemis, that's a totally different ambition. So the next question becomes, what are we really trying to achieve this time? We're laying the groundwork for a sustainable human presence, habitats, science stations, resource extraction, long-duration stays. That requires heavier equipment, more experiments, and more life support capability than Apollo ever carried. Suddenly, a single launch vehicle can't haul the entire mission stack, and that leads to another natural question. Why not just build a bigger rocket? Because even the largest modern rockets have limits, and the mass needed for long-term lunar operations far exceeds what one booster can carry. That's why Artemis relies on orbital refueling, multiple spacecraft, and a coordinated sequence of launches. We're not recreating Apollo, we're building the first blueprint for living beyond Earth. And after hearing about Artemis's complexity, you might wonder, why don't we just throw more money at it, like we did during Apollo? Well, here's the twist. Apollo had something Artemis simply doesn't: the Cold War. Back then, the United States wasn't just exploring space, it was proving a political system. That urgency opened the financial floodgates. NASA received nearly 5% of the national budget, an unimaginable slice by today's standards, all funneled into a single goal: beat the Soviets to the moon. So what does NASA get now? Around 1%, and that tiny fraction has to cover everything: telescopes, satellites, planetary science, climate research, commercial partnerships, and human spaceflight. With so many responsibilities and no geopolitical pressure, the agency can't pour resources into Artemis the way it once did for Apollo. And that leads to the next question: how big were those budgets, really? Adjusted for today, the Apollo program cost roughly $290 billion. Artemis, despite delays and overruns, is sitting near $90 billion. There is simply no modern equivalent to the blank check NASA received in the 1960s. So ultimately, why is Artemis more constrained? Because without a space race, there's no political engine demanding extreme spending, and without extreme spending, you can't recreate Apollo's pace, even with today's technology. The money that once moved mountains now must be stretched across the entire universe of NASA's work. And after looking at the budget, another question naturally pops up. If Apollo already had a rocket powerful enough, why don't we just dust off the Saturn V and use that again? It sounds simple, but the reality is the opposite. The Saturn V was a masterpiece of 1960s and 1970s engineering, built with materials, software, and manufacturing methods that simply no longer exist. To recreate it today, engineers would have to dig through fragmented blueprints, reinterpret old handwritten notes, and reverse engineer techniques that were never fully documented in the first place. And even if we wanted to do that, there's a bigger problem. The experts who truly understood the Saturn V have long since retired, and many are no longer with us. So what's the smarter path? Instead of resurrecting a giant from the past, NASA and SpaceX are building rockets designed for the world we live in now, SLS and Starship, machines that use modern materials, modern computing, and modern manufacturing from the ground up. As we break down the technology and the budgets, another question rises to the surface, maybe the most human question of all. Why does everything seem to move so cautiously today compared to the Apollo era? The answer lies not in rockets or fuel, but in us. Society simply tolerated risk in ways that would be unthinkable now. Think about it. People once smoked on airplanes without a second thought. And during Apollo, everyone, engineers, astronauts, politicians, and the public, accepted that spaceflight was dangerous. When the Apollo 1 fire tragically killed 3 astronauts during a ground test, the response wasn't to halt the dream of reaching the moon. The mission continued with determination and surprisingly little public resistance. But today we ask a different question: how much risk is acceptable when human lives are at stake? The truth is, NASA no longer has the cultural cushion it once did. After the Challenger and Columbia shuttle disasters, the agency's reputation was shaken deeply. The public became less forgiving, politicians became more cautious, and NASA learned that even a single mistake could jeopardize future exploration for decades. So what does that mean for Artemis? It means every component must undergo massive testing before a single astronaut climbs aboard. It means engineers spend years checking, rechecking, and validating systems. Even the Orion spacecraft, which performed impressively during its uncrewed flight, revealed a heat shield issue on its return, a discovery that demanded long investigation before moving forward. And that leads to the final question in this idea: is all this caution slowing us down? Yes. But is it necessary? Absolutely. Because Artemis is being built by a society that demands safety, accountability, and precision at levels the Apollo generation never imagined. The mission hasn't become timid, it has become responsible. And if you're still wondering why Artemis moves slowly, here's the bigger question: is space the only field facing delays today? Not at all. Look around. The old New York City subway added 28 stops in 4 years, yet the modern extension built only 3 stops in 17 years. During World War II, nuclear weapons were developed in 3 years for about $35 billion. Today, modernization takes 30-plus years and costs nearly $1.5 trillion. Even aircraft carriers once rolled out monthly, while a single modern carrier now takes over a decade. Every megaproject today is harder, so why would going to the moon be any different? So after everything we've uncovered, the final question is this: if returning to the moon is harder, slower, and more expensive than ever, why keep pushing? Because Artemis will do what Apollo never could: build safety, endurance, and real progress into every step. The challenges are bigger, yes, but that's exactly the point. As Kennedy reminded us, we choose to go not because it's easy, but because it's hard.